Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Deneen, Director of Marketing and Engagement at Project Medtech, and welcome to another episode of the Project Medtech podcast. If we can help you in any way, or you would like to suggest a future guest, you can email us at info@projectmedtech.com. If conversations like this are helpful, that's exactly why we bring people together at our signature events, the Midwest Showcase, the Startup Symposium, and Coming to America. For more on our events that include networking, education, and pitch competitions for startups, check them out at www.projectmedtech.com. We even have sponsorship options if your company is also dedicated to accelerating medical technology to impact patient lives. So reach out today to get involved. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Ward Law. Ward Law Office LLC is a boutique law firm specializing in the practice of patent and trademark law. They are committed to providing inventors, entrepreneurs, and businesses of all types with personal and professional services and are flexible to meet your unique needs. It is their goal to both educate on how to secure valuable patent and trademark protection and to provide high-quality services at rates affordable to independent inventors, startups, and small businesses alike.
Today's episode of Project Medtech is brought to you by Wheelhouse DMG, performance marketing for privacy-first industries like medtech and healthcare. Every Wheelhouse client experienced record growth in 2025. That's the result of more than a decade building the data infrastructure, measurement systems, and domain expertise that healthcare and medical device marketing actually requires. Find out how every Wheelhouse client experienced record growth in 2025 at wheelhousedmg.com.
Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, Ethan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dwayne. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, Ethan, let's start with a introduction to who you are, your background, and then kind of take us up to what you're currently doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ethan Drower. I am one of the original founders of CiteMed. We've been in business about just over 10 years now. My background is actually in software. So CiteMed is my first and only venture in kind of the medtech regulatory clinical evidence space. It's a pretty interesting story how I got there because I was primarily working in finance, doing some startups that were more consumer apps, a lot of very tech-heavy, data-heavy type of applications. And CiteMed got its start originally because my father, who is a, 30, 40-year quality regulatory veteran running clinical trials and kind of being very deeply embedded into pharma and medtech companies' quality departments, he was tasked with shifting a large manufacturer's portfolio to MDR. So it was an MDR transition. And back then, the big issue and concern was there were a whole lot of medium risk class devices that were being up-classified and now needed heavier clinical evidence. So heavier clinical evaluation, literature review. They needed to present their evidence in a way that they never had to before. And that's incredibly expensive for a company that's not used to paying for it at all. So he was struggling to build budgets, hire consultants. There weren't enough bodies in the entire industry to complete all of these documents and kind of technical files. And people always talk about startups being founded at a kitchen table. It literally was at a kitchen table. And Ed, my father, was complaining about how he was going to get all this work done. And he just kind of had a moment. He was like, hey, if I show you one of these things, how much of it do you think we could automate? And, I took a look at the structures and kind of that was my first look into clinical literature, evidence processing, how to build tables, things like that. And turns out quite a bit can be automated and can be helpful. So that's where it all started. We kind of dove in and immediately found traction and interest because it was such a painful problem, and we really just never looked back. Um, so so yeah, that's a little bit about me and kind of how SiteMed got going.
Super cool. So is this, if we take it back 10 years, are you, you're in Chicago, right?
Yeah, based
Are
in
you are
Chicago.
you are you born and raised in Chicago?
Uh, Born in Chicago, educated in the suburbs, back to Chicago for university. I went to DePaul, studied
Okay.
computer science,
Yeah.
um, and then never left, except in the
Yeah.
winters. I try to leave every single winter if possible, for as long as possible.
So it's funny. Um, when so one of my best friends, Corey, who I was telling you before the show, he runs a few YouTube channels in Chicago. It's all about food to eat, things to do. He does a bunch of
Hmm,
vlogging. It's pretty cool. Like if someone was new to Chicago, I would point them to his YouTube channel because he goes over all these different things that you could do in Chicago. It's pretty cool. But I
wow.
moved him there in 2015, and he lived near DePaul. That's where his first apartment was. And so I helped him like move
Okay.
everything in. We were walking one day and I'm like, oh, this is DePaul. And it's so funny. Like I was a big sports fan growing up. So I know the names of a bunch of universities because of March Madness, but I don't really
Hmm.
know where most of them are. And DePaul was always one of those because they were always a decent basketball program as a kid for me. And then I was like, oh, they're in Chicago, but it's a really cool campus, just kind of right in the middle of,
Integrated.
yeah, it's integrated into Chicago. I thought it was really interesting um, how it was. So
Yeah.
most important questions are Cubs or White Sox?
White Sox when I was a kid, and I'd say Cubs now because my mother's a huge fan, and I also live
Okay.
about 2 blocks from Wrigley.
Yeah.
So I feel like at this point, I'm officially converted.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wrigleyville, Wrigley Field, and the Chicago Cubs. It has to be the best experience to go
I
watch a
think
ball
so.
game. Yeah, I a huge baseball fan. I'm not sure anything touches that.
No, the
But
Red Sox
anyways, yeah,
do it well with the
yeah, that's
neighborhood,
right.
and
Yep.
um, but I feel like the energy of Wrigleyville is it's just something special in the summers. I don't know. I have never come across anything like it. You're right.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty cool. Um, okay, perfect. Um, so do you? Is this like right as you're finishing school that you and your dad start SiteMed?
No, no, I wish I was that young. Um, this is about 5 years after.
Okay.
I picked DePaul so that I could work at the same time. It's a
Yeah.
huge advantage to be an intern, college kid, and
Hmm.
be able to work year round at some of these firms. So I worked in finance, electronic trading, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then I kind of started traveling and building my own projects,
Yep.
small things, trying to support just kind of lifestyle based things.
Yep.
And I never really had any big, um, funded growth startup aspirations really until I got more deeply embedded into medtech, life sciences,
Yeah.
and kind of the evidence path. So that was about, yeah, 5 or 6 year journey for
Yeah.
me outside of
Okay.
school.
Yeah. Now, so obviously having your dad as a founder here is like really helpful because he obviously knows the space really well. Like you said, 30, 40 years in the industry. What was your biggest learning curve kind of coming up to speed, right? Because obviously,
Yeah.
from like a software perspective, I'm sure you were like, hey, yeah, if you show me things, I'm sure I could figure out how to build what we need here. But what were some of those, what were like the biggest things you look back and go, oh boy, that was a tough hurdle to get over, or that was a real big learning curve for me to understand this.
I think one of the reasons why I love this industry so much, and I became a regulatory person, right? It wasn't really a conflict for me. I just kind of fell in love with the idea that you don't need a ton of credentials to be effective. What you need is you need experience and you need to be able to read a lot of very large, very intricate documents. So
Right.
I think getting started, that was that's the biggest hurdle. It's why people don't innovate in this space as much as they do in others, because you really have to know what you're doing and you really have to care. You cannot fake it, build a quick product, throw it out there and see if people buy it like you can in some less regulated industries. People, um, customers won't have it, first of all. And second of all, there's all kinds of legal and regulatory ramifications of doing that. So I think that initial ramp up of, okay, you need to sit down and read as many of the guidances and regulations as possible to be able to put together what an effective product is going to look like. And that's still a process that, you have to continuously do. So um, most daunting at first, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so the idea started kitchen table around the EUMDR, which, that's been a thing that has just lingered for years. The switch from MDD to MDR in
Yep.
Europe. So obviously you kind of start with this regulatory focus. Where have you taken it from now? Where have you taken it from just strictly that regulatory focus to where it is now? What are all the features of it? What can you do? Because and to set the stage even further on this, you know, we talk about um, clinical evidence is the like most valuable thing a startup can collect. It's your biggest value inflection point is the ability to say, we got strong clinical data. Now, when we talk about clinical data, there's, hey, a physician used my catheter in a procedure, but then there's also all the data that's available to you and all the research that's available and all the clinical studies that have been done. And that is a daunting research project. And so, yeah, walk me through the evolution of this and maybe how people are using it outside of just, hey, FDA, here's my clinical data, but hey,
Sure.
my marketing data is based off this, my reimbursement data. There's just so many areas where clinical evidence is important. So, yeah, maybe talk about the evolution.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great question. It's a very interesting arc for us because when we started, everything was very much hair on fire. We need to complete reviews. We were document generators, right? How many literature reviews can we complete so that we can update technical files and actually get devices submitted? A few years into that, there started to be a little bit more breathing room. MDR was delayed. There was a little bit less pressure. And that's really when we started to understand that there's so much more to clinical evidence for a startup and for a mature organization beyond just A to B. I need to complete my regulatory requirement, my annual update, et cetera. So over the last few years, we started to really expand our use case to the bigger picture, right? Which is if your evidence is accessible and it's stored and it's searchable and usable, um, it can be very strategic for your company in terms of right marketing claims, what you can say, or in some cases, what you should stop saying because new evidence is coming out. Um, it can be incredibly useful in terms of increasing your valuation if you're trying to sell your startup, how you can present that, and how you can present kind of a cohesive journey. So we started to realize that evidence, when properly kept, is an incredible asset for a medtech organization. Um, and the majority of our customers, majority of the people that were using our platform, which is Evidence Cloud, uh, weren't necessarily also sharing and seeing that big picture. They were still very focused in just need to get these documents out and then forget about it and move on. Um, and so the deeper we were embedded into that, how do we actually turn evidence into supporting claims? How do we make responses to auditors faster, right? Um, all of these kind of day-to-day processes, how do we decide what to claim and what to market? That's really where we've gone now, because the impact is so much bigger than, okay, we can create our annual literature updates faster, right? It's a pervasive thing. It's across the entire organization now. It didn't used to be when we started.
Mhm. And when you are pulling together, well, actually, before we do that, I have a question about, data integrity, how you filter that out, also the importance of how you deliver the findings and the research and the user interface, because that really does matter too.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but before we get to that, yeah, you talked about Evidence Cloud, right? Is the platform, just high level, to walk me through the different individual pillars of that.
Yeah, sure. It's probably good context at this point.
Yeah.
So we call Evidence Cloud an end-to-end clinical evidence generation platform. And so what that means is we're trying to make for our users the process of figuring out how to collect literature and evidence. So, what to search, where to search it, collecting it in an automated and reproducible way. So, how do we run searches on a whole host of global databases? How do we then process that, clean it, remove duplicates, etc.? And then how do we allow them to review it, review it quickly and efficiently, in an auditable way, extract the right endpoints, the right data that they care about that's pertinent to their device portfolio, and then, of course, either generate outputs, which would be documents, your clinical evaluation reports, your FDA PMA annual literature review, that kind of stuff. And then, full circle, how do we keep that cycle running in perpetuity in a way that keeps your evidence base updated and queryable? So, um, the big thing that we try and do is, it's not just conduct your literature review and forget about it. It's you're accumulating this centralized store of evidence that is now searchable across your devices and your claims, right? So we're not just searching by an author name. Okay, we're searching for, we want to make this statement about X product. Okay, so Evidence Cloud has to have contextual knowledge of what your claims are, what your device does, what your most recent IFU version is, and then, of course, what are all of the pieces of literature that we've extracted and you've reviewed that pertain to that specific statement or claim or research question. So that's kind of where we've headed with it. How's that as an overview?
That's perfect. Yeah. Are most of your clients, um, uh, you know, uh, original, like, are they the manufacturers of these medical devices? Are they consultants? Are they a kind of mixed bag of both? Like, who's mostly using SiteMed?
Mixed bag. The consultants are very interesting. I mean, we essentially were consultants for years.
Right.
Um, so we built it to help our team be more effective and kind of speed up our internal processes.
Hmm.
What's interesting about consultants is that once the consultants perform the reviews and do the evidence, they want to make that accessible and usable for their clients. So, um, that's kind of the path that the consultants take. Now the clients don't just get a document that's 2,000 pages that they'll never read, um, but they also have a way to see all of their references, find the full text, see
Hmm.
what was extracted for those texts, and they have direct access to it. Um, on the medtech side, the manufacturer side, I'd say that's probably about 75% would be actual
Hmm.
manufacturers. Um, they love central store, central place for all of their references, all of their extractions, that cumulative history. And then they love not having to write and copy paste into giant Word documents all of their analysis and all of their evidence. I could do an entire podcast on my crusade against Microsoft Word. Um, we are working very hard to eliminate that part of the workflow for medical writers.
Yeah.
It's just horrible. There's no other
Yeah.
way to say it. It's
Yeah.
not the right tool, but it's the only tool. until now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, awesome. Okay. So yeah, tell me about uh, research integrity and then also the importance of user experience and how you display this information. Because I think, one, the integrity of the data is really important, where you're pulling it from, how you're pulling in the data, but then also how a client interfaces with all this information is also, really important. So for you as being on the software side, yeah, I mean, how much time did you put into each one of those buckets? Because it feels like
Sure.
that's a pretty important step.
Yeah, and I think it's a complicated user experience problem. And this is definitely an industry where I think users get very shortchanged on design and user experience. So we've tried to swing the other way, and we've invested very heavily in design and in testing and trying to make the platform a much more intuitive way to interface with the literature. Um, our big mantra is traceability when it comes to actions that are taken on the platform. So um, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, like removing duplicates, organizing literature and ordering it, serving recommendations, AI-based recommendations, summaries, things like that. But everything that our interface shows and presents is rooted in kind of the philosophy of verification. So we don't want to make a decision for a user or a writer. What we want to do is we want to show a suggestion and then a complete kind of train of thought and direct reference to that specific literature. Um, so that's that's very challenging to be able to show in a way that makes sense. But we find it kind of essential. You cannot be making assessments or screening decisions without justifying why, and the user needs to be able to take all of that in and make their own judgment. Um, yeah, so I think that's kind of our core philosophy when it comes to that. We want
Mhm.
to obviously do as much as possible, make things faster, but we don't want to overcorrect and create a situation where you've now generated an entire report and you can't really explain or understand how you got there.
Mhm.
That's not really acceptable and not it's not a good use of time. It creates
Right.
more problems than it solves, in my opinion.
Mhm. Okay. Um, how about like when you see people, clients interfacing with the platform, but when they come to you, where do you see people struggle the most with this clinical evidence? Like, obviously we know what you're solving for, but where are people really struggling as they reach out to you and say, "Hey, I'm interested in the platform because of this." Is it mostly on the regulatory side of it? Is it mostly on the reimbursement marketing side?
Yeah. Um, That's a great question. I think there's two camps of customers that we serve and
Hmm.
work with every day. Uh, the the first camp is what we would call a kind of a proactive and a sophisticated evidence processor, meaning they have a team that's dedicated to handling and processing evidence. Um, their biggest problem is that they don't really have adequate tooling and support to do what they know needs to be done. Okay. They know that they want to extract specific outcome measures in kind of a polymorphic way on every single article, and they want to store that in perpetuity and be able to search it. Can't do that in Excel and EndNote. It's not possible. So that's kind of the sophisticated buyer. The other side is a company that needs help understanding how they should even structure their strategy in the first place. So they need more than just a tool to execute what they're already doing. They need a little bit more education as to how they should be writing their claims. Um, how they should be attempting to present their evidence to support those kind of claims and statements and things like that. So I think that's kind of the divergence. There's very hardcore workflow focused people, and then there's also people that want more of the, what we would call the out of box experience. They say, tell me how to do the literature review in the correct way. Give me the right structure. I don't want to have to define it myself. Um, Whereas the other side is, here's our 40-page workflow document of how we do an evaluation. Let's support that, right? So so
Right.
those are kind of the two big differences.
Yeah.
There's a strategy know-how gap um, in our clients.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, okay. Next question. Not doesn't have to be related to clinical evidence generation, anything like this, or research, regulatory. It could be your pick. But I think you might have an interesting perspective on this because you came from outside the industry. So you attend conferences, you work with companies, you've seen a lot at this point. Where do you think um, in your experience of going to conferences, where do you think startups struggle the most? And in life sciences, and again, it could be something you're really comfortable with, or it could just be, hey, I've been going to a lot of conferences and talk to a lot of startups, and they really struggle with fundraising, reimbursement. But you get to pick here. It doesn't have to
Okay.
be what SiteMed does.
Yeah, sure. Um, that's a great question. And I feel like I have a lot of answers because we've gone to a few of the Project Medtech events,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
that's very top of mind there.
Yeah.
Um, the biggest challenge, I think, from our side of the fence, the biggest challenge is awareness of how much their regulatory strategy can impact
Mm.
their viability for acquisition and fundraising. So I guess fundraising is the biggest challenge. Um, but I think that a lot of founders who are these incredibly intelligent and capable, either engineers or healthcare professionals that can build some, some fantastic revolutionary device, um, they don't always see, they don't always come back to the hardcore business case of how an investor values that. And investors are very realistic about cost pathways to approval, the costs in doing so. And if you as a founder don't have a firm handle on what that's going to look like for your strategy, then you're worth far less um, for in terms of an investor's perspective. At least that's what we've seen. So um,
Yeah.
I think that's the connection between that and how do we use that strategy as a way to demonstrate our value and our sophistication as a company. I think it's underrated in a lot
Yeah.
of cases.
Yeah. I think that's a great call out. And I think to your point, regulatory is way more complex than people understand. Like it's not as simple as like, oh, this is my cell phone and it makes phone calls, and this is how it's regulated at the FDA. It's like, oh no, this is my cell phone, but it makes phone calls, but it's also a camera, and it can diagnose this disease or do this. It's like, your regulatory strategy can change drastically when you talk about not even technically how the product works, but the claims you want to make and what it's going to be used to
Yes.
do. And those have real implications on your commercial success, and your reimbursement. And so if you're not taking that all in at the very beginning, it's very easy to see how one little mistake in regulatory, and then you get to market, 3 or 4 years later, and you can't make the claim that you want to make, or
But your
you can't get
competitor
the
can.
reimbursement, but your competitor can,
Uh-huh.
and that can affect a lot of different things. So, yeah, to your point, I think taking time and evaluating that, not in a silo, is super important. And that's
Yeah, and
probably where
it's very
companies get,
hard.
yeah, of course,
It's
um, it's very difficult to get. not only the information you need around the table, but also the resources, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a difficult task.
I
So
think it's,
yeah.
and I think what's so fascinating about this industry to me is that um, in most, in almost every other startup industry, uh, you can kind of claim whatever you want, right? SiteMed,
Totally.
we can claim, well, I can change our website today. I can say anything.
Yeah.
And if our competitors change how they're pitching their products, we can change too very quickly, same day, right? Um, but in med tech, what you can claim is so incredibly strategic and potentially expensive and painful to change. So um, the faster you can close that loop of our competitors saying this, can we say this? Can we say something better than this? Um, right now, if you're not working with us and you're doing it manually, that's an expensive process, right? You send an email to regulatory, the, they start cranking up the machine and they start reading papers and trying to go back through their history and find things. Then they send a reply, and that can take weeks, depending on how busy they are, if you even have those people. Um, so I just think that's the most interesting thing about this industry. And if you could be good at defining your claims and maximizing them, um, it's a huge competitive advantage. Some of these markets for these devices are winner take all. The product with the best presented evidence is going to be the one that's recommended in every
Hmm.
case.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And if you're an early
um,
stage startup, that to your point too on the uh, clinical evidence, what you're claiming, all of these things. I mean, that is what drives value for an acquisition and investment. So, I mean, it
yeah,
all adds up. Um, Ethan, what's been your favorite part about being in life sciences and med tech now?
um, favorite part. Well, I would say by far, I would say the team that we've built and that we get to work with.
Hmm.
Starting with my father, I feel like that's a
Yeah.
unique kind of startup journey, especially for a
Yep.
tech company. Um, and then the people that we've come across along the way and kind of built our team with, it's it's really a pleasure. And I've never been in an industry where almost across everybody that we interact with, you're talking with thoughtful, uh, intelligent, and just kind people. From the people that we sell to the people that we hire. Um,
Hmm.
it it seems it's very unique. I mean, I've worked across many industries, and I just I've never seen anything like it. Everybody's just kind of a joy to collaborate with, the
Hmm.
overwhelming majority, right? So I think that's a special thing about this industry, especially regulatory within life sciences, I would say.
Yeah. 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 Totally. I mean, it's a what's the saying, big little world or whatever it is. I mean, it's like it's amazing. Everyone seems to be a few connections away from everyone else. Everyone is, generally speaking, really easy to get along with. It's
Sure.
very collaborative. I totally agree with you. Uh, okay. Last question as we wrap up here. And you can give more than one. I have obviously you could see in my background. I enjoy reading. I get most of my book recommendations from guests. I don't read all of them, but it's like I have a 5 and a 2-year-old, right? So reading is hard to come by. But I'd be curious if you had a book recommendation or two, fiction or nonfiction, um, for the listeners.
Um, yes, I do. I think I'm gonna have to look up the title for you.
Yeah.
Um, I think it was the most powerful and triggering book that I've read in probably the last year. Um,
Okay.
it was called something like bad evidence. And the trying to look up the author, but the premise of the book was essentially that there's so much evidence in articles, clinical literature that's written today that's based off of evidence that was essentially fabricated. Okay. And it was about how the perpetuation of this article cites this article and cites this article, and the original research was flawed, creates this cascading effect of essentially just fraudulent and useless evidence.
Yeah.
But I read that. I mean, I saw the summary of the book, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is essentially refuting everything that we've built our company on, so we should probably take a look at this. Um,
Yeah.
and it's, I mean, it was meant to be scary, but it's also one of the biggest opportunities for technology, right?
Hmm.
A human cannot reasonably drill through all of this references, all of the cited literature,
Yeah.
look at the underlying data, and then calculate if statistically those results make sense and are legitimate, right? It's not possible to do that on a several thousand abstract review of a flagship class 3 product. You
Indeed.
can't do that by yourself. But we can do that because the math is actually fairly simple. The hard part
Yeah.
is the sheer volume of connected literature. So that's something that we've started spending a lot more time on. And you mentioned validity, right? It's not just validity of our process of reviewing literature, it's validity of the studies themselves.
Hmm.
You cannot assume that just because it's been published means that it is correct and that it's
Right.
valid, unfortunately. Um, so I think it's a huge opportunity, but it was fairly terrifying to read
Wow.
some of these
Yeah.
stories of entire bodies of evidence built off of a couple studies that were made up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Ethan, we'll have a link to SiteMed here in the show notes, your LinkedIn as well. Thanks so much for taking some time today and joining me. Hang on for 1 minute. We'll chat offline.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne. It's great to see Project Medtech growing so quickly and really
I
expanding over the last
appreciate it.
several years.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Freddie Coffey, Director of Marketing at Jumpstart. The Project MedTech podcast is proudly sponsored by Jumpstart Inc. Jumpstart's Trailblazer Accelerator helps Ohio's most innovative early-stage health tech startups fast-track their growth with tailored advising from serial entrepreneurs, non-dilutive funding to fuel their journey, and unrivaled access to a network of experts, resources, and investment opportunities. Whether it's improving patient outcomes, advancing digital health, or reimagining care delivery, Jumpstart provides the high-impact services and critical resources to bring big ideas to life.
Thank you for listening. At our core, we at Project MedTech are networkers, educators, and consultants. We meet you where you are to bring value and to create impact. We care deeply about helping medtech companies succeed right from the start, through to exit by providing consulting and fractional services, hosting impactful industry events, and of course, sharing incredible guest insights like the ones you heard today through our podcast. Please reach out at any time if we can be of assistance. Check out our website at www.projectmedtech.com or email us at info@projectmedtech.com.